I'm joined tonight by the host of Stochastic Agency, Brian Greger, who is also my partner in crime in the Facebook group, the the aptly named RPG Techniques Consortium, which we can't say without laughing. So, Brian is one of the members, as those of you who watch the channel may know, of our Call of Cthulhu. I guess now it really feels like a campaign, Turn of a New Leaf. And he has been bringing to life Agent Alex Thornton of the Treasury Department's Prohibition Bureau. And we have gathered together in his morning and my evening to talk about how that's all happening, the techniques and methodologies and madness that that is a part of that play series. So thanks for joining me, Brian.
Well, I'm glad we got the time together again.
Yeah. So, where should we begin?
Well, let's start with the conversation.
Okay.
The whole thing, at least for me, when it comes down to role playing, is it's just a conversation, and communication, your ability to articulate what you're thinking. Part of one of the things that came up, I think, in one of your discussions with another person was the ability to have a lack of visual or mental imagination, that amphantasia, which some people may or may not realize that they have. I was a creative visualizer very early. I've always been interested in art, so I see these things in my head. I think it's a technique that is one of those most underwritten things that people don't realize they have a lot of ammunition to supply themselves with. You know, if you're like in our example, we're playing Call of Cthulhu.
Right.
We've read Call of Cthulhu. We've watched horror movies. We've watched some good and some bad adaptations of H.P. Lovecraft's work. So we have that as a battery of ammunition that we can pull from. You know, phrases that you can say or language that you can use to help set up the scene or portray a character or the behavior of a character, with the emphasis on sanity or losing one's sanity in Call of Cthulhu, being able to, you know, respectfully articulate what's going on, use words that articulate stress, that feeling of unnerve at stages. You know, for example, in our sessions, even though I knew it was coming and it hadn't been articulated yet, the amount of sanity lost, I knew it was at least going to be unnerving, somewhere between 1 to 5 points. Nothing mind-wiping, but it happens. You know, this is the chance to say, okay, here's what unsettling looks like for this character. And we've all watched movies, right? We've all watched movies, we've read books, we've seen TV shows where characters portray these kinds of things. So even though you might not be able to visualize it in your head, you've certainly seen it or you've certainly read it before.
Right. So memory, there's the counterpart issue of memory.
Yeah.
Which also might not be visual.
No.
It might be purely conceptual, but that it is an interesting interplay between, let's say, creating something in your head, or the word I want to use is conceiving of something in your head, and having that represent itself to you however it does for you. For me, it's visual, so I tend to want to use visual language, and it has other sensory elements involved in it, but mainly visual. Like overwhelmingly, it's an image of the thing I'm remembering or the thing I am conceiving, inventing. You know,
Yeah.
there is a person on the stairs, right? So I have no detail there, so I need to invent the person on the stairs. So I will see that visually, but I may add in a season to that. It may be an autumn afternoon, and the stairs may be outside, right? something like that. That might happen unbidden, that aspect of it. Or if it's someone I know, you see Joe on the stairs, right? Then I'm just as likely to remember a moment of seeing my friend Joe on the stairs.
Yeah.
And will that be visual, or will that simply be an understanding of who, what, when, where, why, and how that took place?
Yeah.
So
And
that's meaty
that's what
stuff.
that's one of the very good concepts that comes, there's a lot of discussion around improvised theater.
Right.
And the classic is always just the yes and, but there's a lot more that goes into it. I mean, I only had a few years of drama class in high school, and luckily we did have a drama instructor who didn't just want to do a couple of plays. Some of our drama classes were improvisational games,
Right.
and one of them is the who, what, where, when. You've got to, and this also ties into, like, you're talking about, you see it in your head and how are you going to communicate it. I think this is where we get into a lot of in video games, they would call it a bark, where I'm just going to say something. It's a tagline. It's where we get into, I want to say something now. I can't think of how to say or what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say something that I feel fits, and it winds up being a little bit of a cliche. These are the Monty Python references. It gets a laugh. It gets you want to get a reaction out of somebody.
Yeah.
But you also want to try and get the communication across about what does this person look like on the stairs. When we're trying to translate these visual scenes, like sometimes I'll see things as stills in my head. I see a photograph, or sometimes I see them as flip book, or sometimes I see them as film, like it's rolling. The action is moving, but you've got to be able to translate that language from visual into vocal. So what are your action words? Swiftly, carefully, a lot of these adjectives that we use when we're saying how Alexander Thornton turns around and moves from one side of the room to another, but he's moving in a rush with violent action. He's not being violent and aggressive, but you can tell that this is a change in personality that is gone from calm to unhinged.
Right.
So being able to rely on what you've seen, you've got a battery of stuff in your head. If you're familiar with fantasy or science fiction or horror, whatever the genre may be, your ability to rely on the language that's already there helps a lot. And this can really help to personify what your character is doing or experiencing, or why they may make certain decisions.
Right. And it also is a filter of what may or may not need to be articulated.
Yes.
And of particular interest in this campaign is the notion of disruption and minimizing disruption to allow for as much imagination as possible. Continued focused imagination to allow us to build toward attention. So then the out of character question, like, what are fireplaces like in 1931? Right? is a valid question. Right?
Yeah, it is.
And is
and
one.
If you don't have an idea of what a modern fireplace is like, that could be very challenging.
Well, there's that too, but what I mean is, I go over to the fireplace, right? Mm-hmm. And that is very likely to spark a description.
Yes.
Of some element of the fireplace, which can snowball as you interact with the fireplace as relevant. Or it could be collaborative, right? I go over to the fireplace and I put my coffee cup on the mantle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, some people weren't imagining a mantle. Some people were imagining some different kind of fireplace arrangement. Some people but they imagined it full of bric-a-brac and knickknacks and things. Yeah. And And so, you putting your coffee cup for you is simply a matter of putting on a mostly empty mantelpiece, but for someone else in the room is you
Mhm.
moving some family photos aside so you can put it on the mantelpiece. And for a third person there, they're worried about the heat of the coffee and the paint interacting. There's a whole bunch of things which may or may not be shared, which may or may not become openly collaborative, which may or may not matter. Right.
Yeah.
And but all of that is in our imagination. It's either silent or described, but it's not a disruption. It's a contribution, or
Yeah.
a personal experience of play. But the excuse me while I ask the question is still a valid part of play, but it's a valid part of a different kind of play,
Yeah.
right? One with a lot more changing of level, right, from the in character
Yep.
level to the
Task
out of
switching.
character level. Yeah. So, and that can incur task switching, which can be unpleasant for some and completely unnoticed for others.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really fascinating to get into, to pinning down exactly what you want and having that be relevant to the group,
Yeah.
but seems so completely unnecessary to someone who's listening.
Well, true, but it's a learning process. You touch on a really good aspect of improv, which is building the reality. Both
Right.
approaches are valid ways to build the reality of the game. We're talking about a fireplace in this instance. In the past, I think some of our discussions in the group, we've talked about just rooms in general. Everybody
Yeah.
knows what a kitchen looks like
Right.
and what's
The
associated with.
archetypal
Yeah.
platonic kitchen.
in in and this is just in general. We're not even talking about what era of history this kitchen is in. But then again, we've probably consumed a lot of media. So whether you've watched Peaky Blinders or you've watched uh a modern day rom-com, you all
The
kind of
Brady
have an
Bunch.
idea. Yeah, the Brady Bunch. You
Friends.
have an idea of what a pre-built reality is kind of like. So in this instance, the mantle, right? The
Right.
fireplace. This is our place where we set up the scene. So that's the yes and. We all admit, okay, yes, there is a fireplace here. And how do we get past that? How do we then continue building that details? So who's standing by the fireplace? Where is it at? You know, what else may be there? We can make some general assumptions. What are the accoutrements that usually go with a fireplace that you can find out either by asking the direct out of game question,
Is there a
is
fire
there
poker
this?
here?
Yes,
Yes.
that's a valid way to approach it.
Yeah.
And it could just be taken from the aspect of you can ask the question, but it's how you're asking it. You want to establish or refine or heighten, as like the upright citizens brigade would say, I want to heighten the reality of the situation. As I'm looking around the fireplace, do I see a tool stand? That's a simple yes or no.
Right. We're blending the
It's a
action with
Yeah,
the question.
blending the action with the question. You're still asking kind of quote unquote an out of game, out of character question, but you're displaying the intention of the character.
So how about this then? I walk up to the mantle holding my coffee cup, right? And I look for the fire poker.
Yeah, that's valid. You look
So how,
in this,
but
but
how is it different?
how is it different? Because you're pre-imagining a little bit that it is going to be there. So how do we avoid the no or the pulling of the rug out from underneath someone's intention, right? You may have a desire to act out what the character's doing. Why we don't know why you're looking for the poker. Maybe there's a hostile in the room. Maybe the log on the fire is about ready to fall over, and you just want to make an adjustment to it. So, can we avoid the pulling of the rug out by
Well,
I
in
say
this situation, do you have to? I
no?
look for a fire poker.
when you say, do I have to pull the rug out, or do I have to agree?
Like, no, yeah, either you don't have to agree because no intention other than the looking has been stated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do I see a fire poker? Or is there a fire poker? The first two questions that we fronted have a yes or no answer.
True.
I look for the fire poker is, to my mind, is open. I've stated
It
an
is a
action,
it is a more open intention.
right? The tongs are there. That third thing I can never remember is there.
Or the
The
shovel.
shovel. The shovel,
Yeah,
right.
sure. Yeah.
But the poker is missing.
Yeah.
Or
And
the
that could be
poker's laying separately. Yeah. Or whatever.
yeah. And that could be contextual, right? We're talking about a very minuscule scene here. Uh, whether or
Right.
not whether or not the tools are there, but for the poker may have context within whatever else may have been going on,
Right.
past or future, right? Uh, is this a murder mystery? Was that the weapon used? Could be part of the context,
Right. Right.
uh, that kind of thing. But your ability to operationalize the language at the speed of the game
Yeah.
is something that has to be kind of practiced.
Sure.
I know, like I jokingly made in our group one time, kind of a challenge, and it was the use your words challenge.
Right.
So the idea is you just take an image, just grab a random image from the internet of something, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It could be a scene, it could be an object, it could be a place, whatever. You've only got 60 seconds to look at it. And then you've got to operationalize its description. How do you describe it? What do you
Right.
say about it? What's pertinent to say about it? And can you do it out loud? Don't say it in your head,
Right.
because the way we play this game is by talking to each other. It's like being able to sit down and read a passage out of a book out loud. The more you read the passage or read a poem or read the description of something out loud, the easier it is to imprint the practice of description
Doing it.
while
Yeah.
you're playing it. It's a challenge, and it sounds ridiculous. I mean, I am lucky enough to have a bike and walk path just behind my house, so I'll go for a walk sometimes, and you just find random things out there, a log with mushrooms on it, or whatever it might be.
Right.
These are times and places where I'll take a second to stop and say it out loud. I've gotten strange looks from people sometimes while I'm out there talking to the log, but it's just the way to be able to turn what you want to have other people visualize, the information you want to add to, as they would say, if that thing is true, then this is also true. My character is experiencing stress. How do I express that? So if it's true that he's experiencing stress, what else would follow from that? How do I describe it? Can I do it out loud?
Right. Because we could say, I'm feeling stressed, so.
Yeah.
Or we could, of course, say, he/my character is feeling stressed. Or name of character /he/my character is feeling stressed. Or we could simply talk about visual cues that indicate stress.
Yeah. Whether
Yeah.
they're extreme or minor. It
Or
could
minor.
be
Yeah.
the tick, right?
Yeah.
Whenever we're talking about the early part of American history here, so does he smoke? Right.
So
This is
many people
something
did.
that was commonplace.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when people are stressed, the first thing they'll go for is a cigarette.
Yeah.
They start. Yeah. And we've all seen that too. That's the thing. We're talking about this, but how many times in movies and shows from that time frame can you recall these actions being made, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
they communicate a lot. just especially if what you're wanting to go for is this in-character portrayal, this making of decisions. And it's not, for me, it's not just about the agency you get from being able to, as we've done so far, like with my character, I'm really dictating where I'm going to kind of go during what part of the day, because this is what my character would do. Right.
And can do.
Because it's a open world, for lack of a better word, right? Or phrase.
Right. Well, not only that, but I mean, like, you're not representing someone who is, a line worker in a cannery.
Yeah.
You've got Alex Thornton has a lot of freedom to travel around his world.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I'm not the average Joe Schmo working, at the factory, like you say.
So there's layers, so many layers.
Well,
okay.
Another thing that kind of gets in the way, I think, too, is that people want to keep the game moving. Whether that's a stall from, I'm going to ask a direct systems question and we pull ourselves out. But when you're trying to do, especially when you're getting started, trying to actively play from an in-character's perspective, I think there's not enough time given for exploration. And I don't mean going out and exploring the world. I don't mean I'm going to go down to, the Bowery and dig around.
Right. But explore
the character.
Yeah.
And this isn't about, and I know this is always comes up when this kind of discussion happens. This is not about sitting down and having improvised dramatic theater at the table.
Right.
I'm not going to spend an exorbitant amount of time, doing this. This can be done in 60 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, chunks at a time, in very small chunks.
That when you create the character, there's a sense, maybe, of who that character is, and hopefully of what that character was made to do. Why are we playing this game? Why am I creating this character to play this game? It's, to have some kind of experience with this character. So if I as the player am clear on what kind of experience I'm looking to get from playing this game, and I have this character and understand how it addresses that desire, that still doesn't guarantee that once play starts, what I say as that character comes out as I may have imagined before play.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Lots of people talk about discovering the character, or the character seemed very different in play, and that sort of stuff. So you need to allow time for that, I think.
Yeah. And a lot of it may just be a change in how we get to play, right? We talk a lot about playing online. Yeah. And that doesn't always allow for an expanded schedule. Especially when if we make a comparison between what I'm able to do with Alex Thornton as a solo character versus a situation where we have 2 additional player characters, there's more that has to be folded in. Are you, as a player, going to be satisfied with the amount of immersion you can get if we only play for 2 hours, but these 2 hours have to accomplish a lot of things, versus we are just going to use this session to focus in on the next 3 hours of the day.
Right.
Here is the in-game, and it's kind of a perspective that doesn't get discussed a lot about. We think about, how much can we get done to feel like we've had a satisfactory session? Is it really the amount of stuff you're doing of game time that moves that can make the immersion satisfactory? Or in the Alex Thornton example, which I know you haven't posted, I don't think you posted the one yet, but we're really in that one, this one, we're really only looking at less than 6 hours of a day. In fact, I
Right.
think even less than that. The actual amount of interaction with the world is probably more like 2 hours of actual world time. The discussion with the professor, the going to the house, the
Right.
non-spoilery ending. Uh,
Right. A variety of
the amount
things
of time.
happen in a very limited amount of
Yeah,
physical space. Yeah.
but how much more impactful can that be when you can say we're really only going to focus on this? The game world is moving, yes, but this is the aspect of the game world that we're going to focus on and immerse ourselves in at this time for these characters.
Right.
I got a lot of satisfaction, especially out of that last session that we played, even though the
Sure.
amount of world time is very short. Because I think so
Right.
far it's only been 2 sessions, but there was some expression of the character that I has satisfied with myself from the first one, more expression of the character and more satisfaction with it in the second one.
Right. And I think that's an important point to bring out is like if we had sat down and said, okay, we're going to play an investigation, right? Please create a character going to play an investigation, and I would like to wrap up the mystery in 4 2-hour sessions. So it's like
Yeah.
it's a one shot. It's a
Yeah.
6 hour or 8 hour event, 6 to 8 hours of play.
Mm-hmm.
Then that artificial constraint of number of sessions takes over in a sense. Like if people comply with that desire, takes
Yeah.
over what you would choose to do, and it completely changes the perspective. So you're now weighing every decision from the point of view of will this advance the investigation so that it can reach that conclusion in this many remaining sessions.
Mm.
So playing this campaign, there's no discussion of that at all, right? So we could still be in Alex Thornton's boxing gym from his very first scene, and I, as the game master in this case, would be totally fine with that.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if we spent 20 hours of real time dialogue play in one night at the gym, you know, that's not going to happen either
Yeah.
because I'm keeping track of
Yeah.
how much time is
No.
passing. It's like, it's now the following morning.
That's and I know we try to draw a lot of techniques from everywhere. I mean, because this hobby, this experience, this game is kind of ephemeral,
Right,
doesn't really have its own natural language. We draw in stuff from all
right.
over the place.
Although it does make me hesitant too. Like I'm resistant to the camera, film, literature um, comparisons.
Yeah,
I'm
and I
hesitant
am
about them.
too. Oh, I am too. I don't want to. I'm definitely a person who doesn't want to try and use the camera angle to describe what the player's view is.
Right.
That kind of language,
Panning, turning,
yeah,
zooming. Yeah.
exactly. But there's some procedural stuff that I do try and use. How do I know where I'm going to hit my mark? Where should I position my character at fictionally within a scene to help frame it? Where's my mark? How do I make my entrance? How am I going to introduce my character or actively be participating in this scene when it begins? How do I make my exit? And these are just structural things that I'll try to incorporate because I will start to feel like as a player, I'm dragging this out too long. I believe I've got the answers that I need. I mean, just to be
Right,
respectful, even as a solo player, you
right,
know,
right.
we need to keep things moving. So understanding that I could ask you 1,000 questions, but is that really going to be valuable? No. Let's get to what Alex wants to find out, what's most important to him, what's most important that he wants to express in this scene. and then I need to find my way out of it. How do I
Sure. Yeah.
exit out of this scene? Which with the professor is kind of one of those reasons why I chose to go there at the very end of the night.
Right.
There's going to be a point where you are going to say something or do something to the equivalent to say, I'm getting tired. I need to wrap my day up. You need to go to sleep. So I'm forcing this situation to come.
Right.
But how much can I get in before this happens?
Now,
So
I
there
look at
is
it.
some language, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at it differently when I want to have the experience of the character. Then those are the last conscious thoughts I would be having. Right. I would go to see my old professor at night because I'm sure he's home
Mm.
at night. And I wouldn't want to interrupt him and I wouldn't want to stay too long because it's night. And when I feel resistance or friction in the conversation, because I've asked that same question multiple times, or I keep asking questions that the person doesn't know and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When I run into those conversational walls, then I want to make my exit because I've gotten the information that I've wanted. I don't want to wear out my welcome, and
Yeah.
then I'll try and make my exit. But I'll do this from how it feels. And if I am not able to unify my perspective to that of the character, right? So if I'm the player imagining the character in that scene, then I'm never going to have any of those feelings. I'm never going to feel that resistance, or I'm never going to feel that triumph of getting a juicy nugget of information or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try and distance myself from that. I try and focus in on only what the character might know or that kind of thing. So I don't think about how does the character react. I leave myself open to react is my preference.
Yeah.
As a game master playing NPCs that have some kind of purpose, like the messenger from the mob boss shows up, right? This is a fully realized character for me. At the same time, I would rather have the conversation with the mob boss than the drawn out interrogation of the messenger in the hallway. Right? The boss wants you to meet him at 2 o'clock at the diner. Really? Why? I don't know. I'm just the messenger. Well, did he look angry? He always looks angry. I I would rather not have that conversation. I will. You'll see me go right to the nines playing playing that guy. But I would rather them say, "Okay, we'll either will or we won't meet the boss at 2 o'clock at the diner." So I get what you're talking about from the technical standpoint.
Yeah, and
I'm talking about preference.
that's a very out of character driven. I mean, for me, it's parallel processing. I'm always
Right.
thinking about. I know I'm playing a game. I know I'm playing a character. How do I do both at the same time?
How
How
do I
can
do?
I
Yeah.
have my character's immersion, but take the considerations of either myself and
Yeah.
you at the table
Play
or
better.
myself?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
be a good
There's.
player, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I don't. I sometimes those perspectives will combine, like in the situation with Alexander Thornton and going to the professor's office.
Right.
Right. I know how much time we have to play. I know how much we may or may not accomplish, but I'm also counting on the timing of my decision as a player to do this when to
Right.
correspond with the character's decision to do this when.
Right.
At that point, once the action starts, that's when I know this is my intention as the player going into the scene. Now I'm going to give it up to what happens with the character. I've established my base reality that I want to try and go into, but now I'm going to let us get past the yes and then start heightening the situation. Okay, if what you're saying is true, what else is true about what's going on? We make general assumptions, right? We're in an office, right. There's a desk, it's at X position, there's a fireplace, there are chairs, and then just kind of let it go. In the UCB, they talk about two different forms of heightening. So one is just if you look at it as a graph, it starts at the lower end, right? And it just goes straight up 45 degrees. There is no exploration. It's just build, and keep going.
Right.
Whereas
yes, and. Yeah.
Well, I know this is one of the reasons why I like the UCB. There are various different schools of thought about teaching improv. So they kind of make a little bit of distinction. Once you say yes and the scene starts, there's no more yes anding after that.
Sure.
From here, it's what's true about, if that is true, what else is true? Now we're continuing to solidify the base reality. Everybody playing the game now is trying to hopefully get everybody to see something that looks very similar in their head, or at least is coherent for everybody.
Right. Although if that is true,
yeah,
mechanically, in terms of deploying your mental soldiers, is the same as yes.
Yes.
What else is true is the same as and. It just keeps us from adding new information. It keeps us developing the existing information, but it's still
exactly
an additive.
Well, the purpose of like the opening monologue for the improv, right, is to find whatever the game is.
Right.
And then once everybody on the stage agrees that that's what we're going to play, that's their yes and. Okay, yes and, let's continue along with that.
Right. And now we're not going to add in.
Yeah, we're not going to go
mechanical nuns from.
Yeah, exactly. we've come to an agreement, which is what they would say. We've agreed on this reality. Let's continue.
And if that's true, yes.
And if that is true, yes. Technically, yes, we are still yes anding, but it's a very focused yes and.
Intentional.
Yeah.
So that ties into the example that Ivan was talking about in his video about the book and whether or not he had looked within it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that, at the time of our recording this conversation, the play session with that scene in it has not yet been released. But the situation is that one character, played by Brian Courtmarsh, Alfred Smalls, hands a journal to Terrence McSweeney, played by Ivan, right? Hands him this journal. And then in play, there was an interruption, right? There was the described action of passing the thing over, and then a question was asked.
Okay.
And so the players continued to talk. I don't mean an interruption like someone rang the doorbell or the dogs exploded. I mean that the opportunity to describe what I as Terrence, or what Ivan as Terrence does with the book, didn't happen. Right? Instead, they were operating with the dialogue that was occurring simultaneously. So they talked about that instead. And this went for quite a while, to the point where the book was kind of relegated to being just another detail in the scene.
Yeah. And this is where I would say it becomes Chekhov's gun at this point.
Right. So as the keeper, because I'm watching Ivan, and because Ivan and I have established the awareness that we will accept each other's body language as a part of play.
Okay.
Right. So if I see Ivan scratching at his face, I'm imagining Terrence McSweeney scratching his face, rightly or wrongly. Nice. And if Ivan is holding something in his hand and is gesturing with it, then the character is too, right? And so he never stopped holding the thing he picked up to represent the thing he'd been passed. So the thing he was holding was not a book. It was a book substitute for Ivan. So I then
Yeah.
asked, "Did you look inside it?"
Yeah. And this is, I think, the kind of the thing about where he's talking in his video is, you know, did I really even, or should I really even have thought about, what the character was doing at the time? I don't want to make it seem like, oh, and he's very intentional about this when he talks about it.
Right.
I don't want to turn this into a quote unquote advantage. Oh, well, you know what? Yeah, I was flipping through the book because, oh, now something is going to happen. Right. The characters, and I haven't watched them because I don't, like I say, I don't want to spoil anything for
Right.
me. But they sound very, very much like Lovecraftian characters.
Right.
They're curious. They're going to probably do something that they don't know could be dangerous because of a lack of knowledge.
Right.
That they have a certain kind of habit that would expose them to doing something that could be dangerous without knowing it. So in the case of the book, and that's why I kind of said it's like pulling the trigger on Chekhov's gun. Should I, even if all that conversation, the background dialogue that now kind of obscures the book's object play, which is great because that, like I said, that's a great thing from Improv. We know that this book has something to do. So describing it moving from one set of hands to another is great. But the book, what is being done with the book? Should I say that? Should I just wait until I'm prompted to? Right.
Right.
And that's what I liked about Ivan's videos. It's you can heighten the scene by adding information to it or refusing to add information. Do I conceal my intention or do I make it overt?
Yeah.
Maybe the character he's the type of guy, and I can imagine him. He's the private investigator, or no,
He's
the
the
journalist.
reporter. He's the reporter. Yeah. The
So
buddy of the old high school chum of the private
the high school chum.
confidential
So I can
consulting.
imagine, just the idea of an investigative journalist. I can imagine that part of his habit is going to be, I'm going to open this book and look at it.
Right. Just
Right.
even casually flipping through it.
Yeah.
And then,
because that's what you would do. I don't want to make character assumptions, but given the nature of the job, right?
Right.
You would think that that's probably the action that they would perform. So do I say it before I'm asked and not make it seem like, oh, now I can turn this into something interesting?
Right. So yes, exactly. Right. And so his response was, well, he had been imagining flipping through it. So he answers, I was flipping through it. And then he has the reaction like, oh, people are going to think I'm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's the pain of the recorded session, where um,
It is.
what will people think of me?
Yeah, but if we consider the style of play, right?
Right.
We want to make sure that we're staying in character habits. What would they do? And there's a lot of things that go into it. I mean, there are a ton of assumptions you do have to make about who a character is or would be or would behave.
Right.
Your ability to operationalize and verbalize those things are personal challenges. Whether or not other people get anything out of that you're doing, well, that's not necessarily your problem. That's someone else's problem. And while you want to be considerate of other people or even the viewers of an actual play, you can't cover all your bases. You just can't.
Right. Especially if you're going for this unity
Yes.
of perspective between player and character. Yeah. So
And
in that particular scene, it's
Yeah.
interesting, right? It's interesting to me because of the two characters, or there were two characters in the scene, one of them already knew the detail that would be revealed by a casual flip through.
Yeah.
my question really was one of, are you flipping through it or not? And because in my head, I couldn't imagine him not flipping through it, and I wanted to know. Right? And if he wasn't flipping through it, what would be the reason for not opening it?
Mm-hmm.
And so the detail would have come out either way about what was inside, the covers.
Yeah.
And it may have been discovered, a few minutes later, and it may have been discovered later that night, or it might have been days later. It wouldn't have not been discovered. So it wasn't that kind of thing. It wasn't like the game master saying, right, this is a time sensitive clue, or this is a gotcha trap, or something like
Yeah.
that. It really simply was, are you the kind of person who is flipping through this book while you're talking to your friend? Or are you the type of person who's getting all stressed out because you're talking to your friend, but you really want to be flipping through the book? Or have you been handed the book and you've never given it another thought? This is what I needed to know about
Yeah.
the
It's
play.
the innocuous question.
Yeah.
Right. So, or an innocuous description. It seems like, oh, okay, it could go either way. Is he asking me because something bad could happen or not happen? And you really are just trying to clarify what's going on. It would be
Yeah.
the same way as if I described, like, say, you're trying to break into the mob boss's office, and you seemingly pick the lock with ease. Seemingly, like,
What does that mean?
okay, was the lock even really locked? Did I, or was it just, are you trying to tell me that I'm being set up for something here? It's an innocuous description, which could be,
Yeah.
it causes some tension.
Yeah.
I'm going to second guess what's coming next.
Yeah.
But
Why
even
is
being asked,
seemingly? Yeah.
seemingly, yes, seemingly there are no guards in this part of the building.
Yes.
So that clarity of communication, or the intention behind, asking a question, sometimes it's just saying, hey, I just want to make sure, are you looking in the book as character or not? And I know that's stepping beyond
Right.
into that other realm, but sometimes that clarification just does need to happen because of the innocuousness of a statement or the innocuousness of a question.
Right. And in that particular session, I'd taken myself off the leash, for contrast.
Yeah.
There are some sessions where I'm trying very strictly, or as strictly as I can, to just try to give voice to character senses. And there are other sessions where I'll play in a more relaxed state, so that it can be obvious over the stretch of sessions.
Yeah. So kind of circling back to the ability to communicate, right? Because a lot of this we're still talking about being able to communicate.
Sure, yeah. It's a verbal medium.
There's a concept that they'll talk about at the UCB called top of your intelligence, or top of your head.
Right.
And a lot of people will talk about, and I think it was even in, this one here, right? We had seen that one come out not too long ago. The role playing
Right.
for
Improv
gamers,
for
or
gamers,
improv for
second
gamers.
edition.
Yeah. So the games that they'll give examples for, there's a big reason why the exercises and games really do work. And in particular, they can work for that coming off the top of your head, right? Priming yourself to be able to think on your feet. So things like even just the simple games like the name game, or the name of a color, the name of an animal, the name of a person. This ability to keep the round robin firing very rapidly bleeds into your ability to, can I fire off what's in my head as accurately as possible? Are you going to say Tommy or Thomas? Right. Are you going to say Cindy or Cynthia?
And as a tangent, a useful tangent, all of these tools that we've been talking about, they also function, and they're also a part of language learning.
Yeah. Oh, very much so.
They not just build vocabulary, but they build fluency with existing vocabulary, and they point out a lack where vocabulary has been learned, but it's not
Yeah.
active. It's passive.
Yeah.
Right. And you'll remember it 10 minutes after the conversation. It's like, that was the word that I wanted, you know.
Yeah.
So all of these things help to loosen it up and build more of an active vocabulary for whatever function that you're trying to do. So, so it's really interesting to me.
And there are just a lot of different approaches for that. I mean, as varied are authors for books, there are various different schools that all teach improv. They all kind of have the same central tenets. Their approaches are fairly similar in a lot of ways, but they may diverge in the Second City versus the Upright Citizens Brigade in Chicago. These kind of things, they're just maybe cultural differences, maybe practical differences, and still kind of thinking about, I want to be able to describe what's going on. It's not like if you're watching a movie and something comes up like, can you describe the sword fight scene in Princess Bride from the perspective of that is what your character is doing?
Right. Not what you've seen top down.
Not what you've seen on screen. Don't describe what you are seeing, describe what you are doing as that character. It's that kind of adaptation that helps build that I'm thinking at the speed of the game in the table kind of technique.
Right. Yep. I like it. Yeah. And that is handy for things such as in this context, we're playing in the 30s, or we're playing Star Wars, or we're playing Shadowrun, or whatever, where there is a very specific, let's say, visual design language, right? How are rooms lit? With what consistency are rooms lit that way? How are houses heated, and with what consistency in this time frame? Does it matter? How do people dress? The 30s are a really interesting time in terms of how people dress.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Like the mechanisms of clothing are actually different. And does it matter? Because it doesn't always. I've played with people for whom it's annoying, right? Can't we just imagine that they all just buy their shirts and that they can just put their shirts on and yeah, sure, we can do that. Or I got people who really like the fact that the collar is separate from the shirt and the buttons are separate from the shirt and the cuffs are separate from the shirt.
Yeah. Well, but that there's a good thing that you can operationalize there.
Yeah.
People who had separate collars and cuffs were from a particular class of people.
Yeah.
So it is a way
to
it is a way to operationalize in a game that takes place during a particular era what the difference is about your character is.
Yeah.
And it's subtle. You don't have to make it like overt. I don my collar, you can just talk about the actions, because I think, well, you can say, I, Joe the worker, I get dressed, right? There's not much. You can add some detail to that, sure. And I know we're talking about a very mundane thing here, but when I
starting your car or whatever.
Yeah. All these things, a lot of what they would say, cut out the shoe leather for me. Let's just get to the action. Okay. But when I most of the time when I remember seeing these scenes where someone of that class was getting dressed, there is a shirt stand. There is all this stuff that is on a stand. There's things that go with it. There's this ritual. There's this setup, right? Like I think I just watched The Untouchables not too long ago, and I just noticed that the I guess you would call it I don't know if you would say it was a foyer, but the room right before Capone's De Niro's office
Right.
is where he's got his closet, his shaving setup. That's like a man's hair care walk-in closet. This is where I get ready for my day at room kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
thing. It's a different structural setup.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I used to study architecture in high school. I can't remember if there's a specific name for that kind of room. Foyer is the only thing that comes to mind,
Well, that's
but
just
that's more like
another word for lobby, but
yeah,
but
exactly. It's
but
the
like he is living in a
pre-interest.
hotel, right? I can't
Yeah.
remember the name of the hotel, um, but he's living in a he has floors of that hotel, very
Mm-hmm.
you know upper
Does his
scale
thing.
hotel, and so yeah, there's going to be a very specific and purpose built uh, arrangement of rooms for him. Plus, of course, that's a movie,
And
but
I think there's a lot that goes into like when you're talking about how things are lit. It's for me, it's the importance of those aspects for me is it helps me to keep the framework. I'm not gonna just walk in and turn the dimmer switch on, right? I
the
have to
clapper.
think about, or a clapper, yeah. There are these things I have to keep in mind for everybody to keep the reality that we're playing in the same, or at least
Right.
within the neighborhood for everybody, because that base platform that we've established, if we cooperate at the basic level to maintain it, it does help to bring together everybody's visualization, right? Because if you're sitting at a table with six people, you only have 1/6 of the point of view that's actually being imagined, and
Right.
that's your own.
Yeah.
Chances of it matching someone else, pretty slim.
Well, unless you're in the practice of everybody, you know,
Yeah. The
sharing what they're
vocalization.
imagining. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the first session, we had a little touch with that because we go up to the private investigator's office, Eddie Driscoll's office. And the
Mm-hmm.
whole building is wired for electricity, but of course Eddie Driscoll can't pay for
Yeah.
electricity, right? So he's got little candle holders with little stubs of candles providing illumination. They've got one, you know, fluted kerosene lantern,
Mm-hmm.
so probably from an aunt's house or something. Like he's a big hulking boxer type of guy. So the little metal uh, candle holders, those make a certain amount of sense for some bachelor man. But then there's this this glass kerosene lantern. Like, where did this come from? And it never became a topic of discussion. But it's there, and but this is how he has to make do because he doesn't have the
Mm-hmm.
money as the depression is really having its effect on everybody.
Yeah, because I think especially for like playing games within a certain time frame era of history, it is challenging to like what's the cutoff for stuff to keep in mind, right?
Yeah,
When did we actually have light bulbs? When were glass window panes actually invented? You know, is this the era of the printing press?
right,
These kinds of whether it's a technological thing, whether it's a sociological thing, cultural, you know, where do you draw the line on, staying within the anachronism, so to speak?
right. That's why I keep saying,
And
like, and
yeah,
does it matter? Like, if someone
it
says
doesn't
I go to
matter.
the ice
Yeah.
box, I know a few people in the group will be imagining a refrigerator instead of
Yeah.
an ice box.
A box with ice in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And like
And
living here
that's
in Korea, I saw the end of the icebox age, and I don't know really why that was.
really
Yeah, like because Korea modernized long, long ago, way before I got here, and yet there was still these ice delivery guys who go around
interesting.
delivering sheets of ice to really old houses, and it
Huh.
was a thing that I got to see with my own eyes, but in the modern day. Um, but the this era, you know, the ice box and the ice delivery guy, the Iceman, is still a very real consideration. Of course, there's
Yeah.
no TV yet. Yes, there is radio. No, there's no TV. And you know, heaters in cars was a question that came up in play. It suddenly burst out like, "Are there heaters in cars?" And the player, another player in the scene, was very quick to say, "It's broken," so it didn't matter. It's broken. And yes, there were heaters in cars, but they weren't built in. And there's a whole bunch of trivia,
Yeah.
which is not the point of play, but can
True.
enrich it for some and be a burden for others. And
I guess in the video game industry, they would call that your level of detail, your load, how graphically accurate is the simulation, right? It is valuable information if you're considering, like, I'm the type of guy who likes to throw Molotov cocktails. That
is Molotov around yet?
Well, likes to throw a flaming lantern. Let's put it that way. Because if the heater's not built into the car, it's not based off the heat being generated by the engine block. Where does that heat come from? Well, there's
kerosene,
this thing, kerosene thing built in. So I have access to a flammable fuel. Awesome. Those kind of things
were batteries.
Yeah, that's true, because battery technology was.
What are batteries like in 1930?
Yeah, they were chunky.
So now you have access to a club.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it.
But they can help just establish the reality. I mean, I agree. There's some parts of it that a certain level of detail where you're getting to the picking of nits about things.
Yeah.
And it's not really adding that much detail to the game, or it might not necessarily add that much enjoyment to everyone to the game.
Right.
But it's that general, that's for that after session cool down thing. Hey, just to remind everybody, if this comes up in the future, this is how cars are heated in the 1920s or 1930s. Or because while it may be trivia, it could be one of these pieces of trivia about what was available in the time that comes in handy for someone who likes to throw flaming objects.
Yeah.
As a general arbiter of chaos.
Or just, because that's often how these stories end. And they burned the farmhouse down.
And they burned the farmhouse down. And you could just say, well, there's kerosene in the barn, or there's whatever. You don't have to go through the whole shoe leather action.
But how much more satisfying is it if this random detail came up by accident 4 or 5, 10 sessions ago suddenly matters? Yeah, it's great. I like that stuff.
And that's one of the things I enjoy about a lot of the sessions I have played in lately, and how I've structured my sessions is I've kind of ritualized it a bit to help get play moved in the direction of taking action. Like, I don't like playing while we're sitting and eating pizza. As an in-person, while I may be playing a beer and pretzels game on some instances, like, hey, we're playing a one-shot tonight, we just want to explore the system. I still don't enjoy eating while actually playing and handling the book and handling the dice and handling the artifacts of play.
Right.
But there is going all the way back, harkening back to that age-old technique of building the magic circle.
Right. Yeah.
When everybody gets over here at the house, there's the general chit-chat conversation that happens before we ever start playing. Let's wrap up what's going on with you and me in our lives before the pizza arrives, so that we can avoid the out-of-game barks that would happen to interrupt in character play.
Yeah.
Right? Like, all of a sudden somebody belts out with, this happened to their mom in the middle of a gaming session, is stuff that can happen. I mean, they're the typical subjects that it's kind of one of those things that's been talked to and expressed a lot about how do we stay focused in playing a game.
Yeah. So
when it came to playing Regime Diabolique,
Yeah, yeah.
I purposely had bought wine. I mean, I came from a culinary background and I was classically trained in French cooking. So I had made pastries, I had made a charcuterie board,
Right.
done these things to ritualize and set up the act of us getting together as a group of friends, the way musketeers may sit at a table when they get together and act as a group of compatriots.
Yeah, it's nice.
And
It's
then
lovely.
once it was a good experience. Not everybody enjoys wine, but hey,
Yeah, yeah. In the World of Darkness days, we had for each of the different chronicles, there was a song I would play. There was a point where pregame banter stops or it's
yeah,
winding down, but I would hit play, the opening chords of whatever that song might be for whichever of the campaigns would begin, and silence would fall, and people would be recapping in their heads, right?
mm-hmm.
Then one person would actually deliver the recap, and as soon as that recap was finished, sometimes it was me, but usually it was one of the others. As soon as that recap was finished, now we're playing.
Yeah,
And then we'd get to the end of our available time, right? And I would hit the outro music,
nice.
right? So there's a nod to that in how I'm editing this actual play series, right? There's a reason why I put that music together and put the opening
Yeah,
narration and is as a nod to that. Um, this focusing moment. There's getting ready for play. There's recapping. There's discussing elements about who the character is or what they might want to do. Then we have this kind of grounding moment in the setting, being the music and the voiceover,
mm-hmm.
and then play starts on the other side of that.
And then you guys kind of, I mean, we've already been doing this for a little bit. When do you think you actually started operationalizing the cool down part of play? Like the outro music is done, whether you're actively playing it or not. When do you think you really started incorporating that? Okay, the game is done. It's still on everybody's mind. Let's have the cool down discussion. Here's what happened. Here's the direct review.
Honestly, I think from the beginning, it was always there. Then I noticed it was there, and then um, it became something that I did actively. So as long as I was playing, it was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's kind of a weird one for me. But like I started playing at the height of the Satanic Panic. I was forbidden to play. So the point where I discovered I was forbidden to play was, of course, after I had started playing. So then it was, you cannot play, right? It was taken away from me. So of course I just kept on playing. But
Oh
what
yeah,
that meant was that we played going to school, we played in the stairwells, we played secretly and in awkward places, which meant an awful lot of talk about the game in the form of a recap because we only had to play for 5 minutes yesterday. We got to play for 2 hours the day before, and so what is going on? And we would stop in this moment, and we would pick up in the next moment. You know,
mm-hmm.
so there was a lot of talk about play. There was a lot of talk about different rules, and we were experimenting with stuff, but also we all had different rules, right? I had Moldvay, and I got to read Holmes, and the guy who gave me Moldvay had Menser, and so sometimes I got to read that, but I couldn't have easy access to them because I wasn't allowed to play. Right?
Yeah,
So we would talk about rules, and if we found a difference, we would talk about that, and if we wanted to make a change to how a rule worked, we would talk about that, and so we were always talking about play immediately before and immediately after playing. So it's always been there for me. And how to do it, how to operationalize it has changed over time, mostly with my access to technology changing. So around the time that World of Darkness came around, we all had apartments and people were buying home theaters. And one of the guys that um, whose apartment we often used because he had the best space and he was really the best host. Like he just had his stuff together about being a host. Right?
Nice.
We could show up and it was comfortable. It was clean, and he was happy we were there. And he had this 10 CD rack changer with a remote. It sounded like a machine gun when it
Oh
changed. So I
yeah.
I learned to play with the discs that I loaded very carefully to minimize this sound. But I'd
Yeah.
plan out the playlist in my head. But the only two songs I ever cared about was that opening song and the ending song. And it didn't take very long for them to have that magic circle effect. Like when you heard this
Yeah.
song, you knew play was starting. When you heard that song, you knew play was over. And if any other song that got played was just meant to be in the background, and it meant
Mm.
it was actually that song was actually being played in
Yeah.
that actual location.
Well, just the same way you would have like we look at TV, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of times now what we're
Incidental
seeing,
music.
especially on Netflix, is there's the opening scenes where we recap what happens before.
Yep.
Then we cut to the trailer of the music and the thematic video of whatever the show is, like
Right.
Hannibal or whatever it might be. And then we get to where our scene starts now. Right.
Right.
It's a very, I think it's a great technique to do. I've fiddled with music a little bit. I'm always never been very partial to anything lyrics, usually instrumentals, especially when it's
Sure.
inside the bookend,
Right.
right? And
Certainly.
uh, definitely background music. It's just one of those challenging things to try and be able to incorporate into the mood. Do you have access to a soundboard, whether that's on your little tablet or whatever? Do I have to fiddle with my Bluetooth speaker, which I seem to be having to do lately with, I think
Yeah.
it's going out on me or something. It's like, oh, I'm connected. But tomorrow I'm not going to connect. And I'm not going to connect to you all day tomorrow for some reason, even though I see you on my laptop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So we don't need the frustration when we're playing.
yeah, it's you start to like, how much friction does it cause for me to, even though I know it can evoke what we want to do, how much friction is there to get the job done? Right. So
Right.
there's a tendency to always streamline, kind of going down.
When I started the first session with Ivan, um, there was this very strong compulsion in me that I knew how the scene would begin, right? Not something that he would experience, not something he would do. Like I would force him to go somewhere to experience
Mm.
something, but that as part of the description of the opening, there was this song that I wanted to be there. It was really important to me as part of the design language for this semi-fictional Boston, right?
Mm.
And I didn't want to play it. Uh, Not
Like
only
actively.
because, yeah, I didn't want to actively play it,
Okay.
and I didn't want to go through the technology issues of doing it. I didn't want to go through the having to cut it out of the video issues for YouTube and
Yeah.
any of that stuff. Um, so I sent it to him as a link. I said, when you're ready, right, to get ready for play, I would just like you to listen to this song. So it was one he'd already
No, that's.
heard, of course, and it's a strange fruit is the
Mm.
song, and
I'll have to check it out.
yeah, it's an important piece of American history and American musical history. And it has nothing to do with the campaign. It's not a hint. It's not a clue.
Yeah.
It's none of that. It's a tonal piece, and it's a piece of realia to insert. But one of its details is that we're playing in 1931, which doesn't much matter. And the song is from 1939, which doesn't much matter. But that character heard that song from 1939 in 1931. Now, whether I ever do anything with that detail, I have no idea. But that detail
Yeah.
is in there, and it was a real powerful creative impulse to have that be how that session opened. Right.
Oh, I think it's a great idea. Uh, music is inspiring, and it's a detail that you can leave on the table and pick up, or just leave there,
Or not.
or
Yeah.
not. Uh, I know one of the things, and speaking of like the table itself, I know this is kind of one of the things that will come up very often too when we're talking about in character, as character play, and this kind of thing is uh, props,
Right.
music, actual physical props, or emails if you need to DM someone through the technology.
Right.
I know that's really big in Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
And as you might be able to tell from my background, like behind me, you can see a wall of paint.
Right.
And you can see miniatures there. So two of the things that I know have come up in conversations, or things that I've seen in other YouTube videos where people are talking about interruptions to my experience, my immersion, things that yank me out. One that is always seems to hold primacy is miniatures.
Sure. Yeah.
The other one is props, whether or not
Yeah.
they're as valuable or invaluable, whether they keep you there or take you out. And I think you're more on the prop side, right? I never really see you with a brush in your hand, or discussing your latest, purchase from Games Workshop or anything.
As a BattleTech player, I
Well, yeah,
had a very extensive uh, set of mechs, which were all painted. The guy I was mentioning, who was a great host, was the guy who started me on painting mechs, and
mm,
all of our mechs for all of our we played BattleTech on Tuesday night or every week for years. They could not enter play unless they were painted. Living over here, I've never
no gray
purchased
bottles.
any. Yeah, living over here, I've never purchased any paints or
Yeah,
brushes. I still have an extensive set of mechs available to me. None of them are painted. They all enter play, um, and it interestingly for me has not affected the immersive quality that using that miniature lends to me. In fact, I've found the unpainted mechs are easier on me than the painted ones,
mm.
because I wind up in exception land, right? Well, it's this type of mech, but it's not this color.
But
Or it's
imagine
this
it
type
with,
of mech. Well, actually, it has this
there's
is
a
the
lot
three
more battle
PPC variant.
damage.
Yeah,
Just imagine with a lot more
exactly.
chipping, and I
So
mean,
it's
but that's
a
yeah,
lot easier for me to edit the thing if I know it's unprepared for play than if it has been prepared for play. And that's just a quirk of my own personality and
yeah,
imagination. It
yeah.
doesn't have to apply to anybody else, but that's my experience. Um, we had 3D maps and we had real terrain and we had all kinds of stuff. It never got any better for me than the flat paper map and the unpainted miniatures.
Mm.
It didn't work for me, but it definitely worked for some of the people that we played with. Right, the
Oh
amount
yeah,
of time that they invested into doing the miniatures, you could definitely see that their imagined situation was far more vibrant as a result of all that work than it would have been if we were just using the paper standees, right?
yeah, yeah.
But all through my time coming up, the admonition, the sense you get from the earliest editions of D&D that we're doing this to get away from the miniatures, that imprinted on me pretty strongly, and so I I just really never used them. I certainly couldn't have openly bought them or openly painted them anyway until I got to university, and of course
Yeah.
then there was no money,
Nope.
so you know, and I didn't even have access to stores until after university, anyhow. And they weren't selling miniatures, so it really wasn't a part of the equation. So I was well established, more than a decade in gaming by the time I had access to minis for role play, and I bought them. I bought the Call of Cthulhu miniatures.
Mm.
Right? I didn't buy fantasy miniatures. I didn't buy Shadowrun miniatures
Oh
or
yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah.
I bought Call of Cthulhu miniatures, and I painted them, and they came with three states. You know, the sane version, the losing it version, and the
Oh yeah.
batshit
Oh,
crazy
okay.
version. And I bought
This is
the
the
different
Raul Partha,
monsters and
yeah, the
yeah,
Raul
yeah,
Partha stuff. Yeah.
and so I had all of that stuff, and I never used it. I bought them, I assembled the monsters, I painted everything, and never ever used them.
And it's a totally understandable thing to do, right? I've kind of been in and out as far as like the usage during play, and it's not because I think that it's better or that it makes it worse. Uh, it is a matter of convenience. There's a lot of work that goes into trying to make something on a tabletop, and I might fall into that category of people who uh, the level of 3D-ness of the actual table doesn't necessarily matter as much to me as is it an understandable environment? Like, can I look at this thing on the table and understand what's going on? You
Right.
know, uh, there's a lot more convenience of play when you don't have to, like, I mean, I've played on Mordenheim tables, Games Workshop old skirmish game where it was such a pain to get in there and do the movement that it detracts from the enjoyment. Yes, the table, this 3 foot by 3 foot table looks beautiful, but it's a pain in the ass to play on
Right.
because of you've tried to get everything to scale. All this stuff has gone into it. It's arguably not a bad piece of work. It's just as a game artifact, as a game piece, it's challenging to work with, which can
Right.
detract from the play. I know a lot of people will fixate on not the idea that it's a board game or the counting spaces thing, and that's kind of a war game versus a role playing game thing. I've got to have my ruler, or I just count my hexes, or I just count my squares. But that idea, going back to visualization,
Right.
right, is
And
what
not
I'm
having to
seeing on the
talk
table,
about
what
the
I'm supposed to
information.
see. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I
There's
get
that
this.
that side,
Yeah,
and
that's a
the
big part of the argument that I see.
yeah.
And for me, it wasn't. I don't care if you're playing with little furniture pieces. That's fine, or whatever it might be, or all the way down to like having the serving dishes and whatever might be on that table.
Right, right, right,
Right? Your level of dollhouse involvement. I'm not trying to be derogatory by saying dollhouse, but
right. But that's
because I
an
have
easy way to
this
get
stuff.
that material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for crying out loud, that whole corner of the room is nothing but focused on that hobby. When I sit at that's part of that immersion for me
Right.
is when I sit and I paint a Thri-kreen or a Mind Flayer or a Beholder or a Dragon or a player character's model, whether or not that model is going to get used, that's world building for me. That's that kind of immersion in thinking about I'm painting my investigator for Call of Cthulhu, even though this piece is not going to be used, helps me to charge that imagination, so to
Yeah, yeah.
speak, you know?
And there's the element of things that don't have to be said and questions that don't have to be asked. Where are you standing? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be asked. Um, who's closest doesn't have to be asked.
Yeah.
Who was attacked last turn doesn't have to be. None of those things have to be. It's just you can just see it.
See it.
And some games are better at communicating other information like injury or aggressiveness or readiness or
Stance.
stuff like that. Yeah.
They would call that there was a phrase from the French military when referring to a battlefield captain's ability to understand the battlefield. And it's something like un coup d'œil, which means roughly translates to at a glance.
Coup d'œil.
So you can look at a thing and understand its situation. Your ability to do that as quickly as possible is how long do you need to look at it.
Right.
But from
That's
a props
super valuable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is
super
valuable. And I do get some people, they focus a lot on the map and the details that are actually on the map, right? Like going back to what you're saying, well, yeah, I know this is a map of a volcano's crater, but this is actually, you know,
A
that can
swanky
be
living room.
well, I mean, not that extreme, but this is a meteor crater instead of a volcanic crater. At least I'm getting there, right?
Right.
I couldn't print out the moon crater map, but I got this volcano crater and it looks really cool.
Right.
The shape is there, the detail just doesn't work, right?
Right.
But I know you've talked a lot, especially when it comes to the Mass and Nyarlathotep.
Yeah.
Right. That box, which I still have yet to acquire. I have every intention of getting that box.
Right.
Because I do find props sometimes are very valuable. Depending on, now letters can be a bit challenging, I think, when there's information contained within a document that you may need to pull out when you're reading it. And how long does it take me to read? And for crying out loud, is it easy for me to read? I mean, I'm
right. Is it written in some kind of weird script font?
Did they script it? Yeah. Did they do that to it too? And they're valuable. I mean, what have you for your? I know we're talking about the difference between online, offline. Props are probably a lot easier offline, more valuable offline. But how often did you find yourself using that as a key way to maintain or trigger or involve immersion?
Less and less over time.
Really?
Yeah. So when I first started playing Call of Cthulhu, I didn't use any because I was making my own adventures because that's just the way I'm wired.
Yeah.
And then I got a book of Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu adventures. They all had props. So, oh, this is really cool. These letters and things had access to a photocopier, so it was not difficult for me to provide them to the players, and it heightened the experience. So then, when we had a big group of people playing Call of Cthulhu, and I started to think that we could probably handle Massive Nyarlathotep, which they gave to me, right?
Yeah.
I went all out, and so I went down to the university library and I printed everything out. It's the first time for me to make a prop because I had to make a matchbook.
Yeah.
And like you could do it in your sleep, but for me this was difficult, And the matches I had didn't fit in the matchbook, so then I had to laboriously cut the ends off, and it's just stuff like that. But the I had my file folder full of prompts of props. It was a little difficult to manage. The second and third time I ran Massive Nyarlathotep, it was difficult to manage. The first time I ran it, we ran it in 18-hour blocks.
Wow.
And so we had Friday off. We played Saturday, and we played for a couple hours on the following Sunday, right? So 18 hours, and 6 hours or something like that. I don't remember. So it was really easy for me to keep the different props clear in my head. Had we been playing for 2 or 3 hours or even 6 hours weekly, this would have been a much different experience, which is what my subsequent experiences were like. Where did they find it? How did they find it? Right. There's a lot of having to refresh myself before play. It was less fun. The impact of them getting it never decreased. The desire in me to always have them never decreased. The likelihood that I would prepare a whole bunch, it disappeared.
Yeah. Well, mass it's an undertaking. I mean, I haven't run that one in a very long time, and I haven't played in that. That's back in my high school days, the late 80s.
Right.
And I think that was the first time we played masks was probably 87. And it was, and I hate to say it, but we were all fresh off the boat of D&D World of Darkness. Let's play Call of Cthulhu. Oh my God, we're playing Call of Cthulhu like we're playing massive, like we're playing World of Darkness. So the first experience of it wasn't probably true to the game. And Phil, God love the man, did his best with all the props. And there's a lot to manage in that. If you manage to go through everything, the box by itself is, I think, a phenomenal piece of gaming artifact.
Oh, the Historical Society's box.
Yeah, the Historical Society's box. I mean, that's
amazing.
The box I'm talking about. Yeah,
that's
because
that
has the look and the feel, and you can know that and I'm a fan of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of care and understanding that goes into creating something like that can enhance the experience. The second time
even audio, right? There's the wax cylinders. It's just great. Yeah.
The second time I went through it was the mid 90s, probably 94, 95. So this is after college. At that time, still living in Springfield, Missouri, and the college town where I went to college in. And it was much more well organized. And the props were definitely something that helped with that, because there was, I think, kind of from a player's perspective, it was like a badge that you could attach to say how far you had gotten. Like, because you're only going to get certain prompts for getting so far in. So it was kind of, for a player, it was kind of a sense of accomplishment. From a character's perspective and playing in that way, some of them almost turned into bargaining chips on how to help each other out, because there were, at the time, we had even though we were kind of just getting into playing as characters, we were still experiencing a lot of inter-party conflict. When you have criminals in the group, you kind of have to accept that there is going to be a certain amount of criminal behavior that is going to happen at the table.
Right.
And so there's a certain acceptance that you have to get. Not because of a social thing. I mean, if you're playing a murderer, someone whose character was convicted of murder, who is probably more likely going to commit murder than as another player at the table, there is a certain acceptance that you have to get about what it's like to play in a very mixed group. From the level of cosmic ambivalence that I experienced with the antiquarian, who at that was probably the character who had lost the most due to Cthulhu mythos knowledge at that point in time, to the criminal who was trying to reach for power for his criminal organization by using what we were finding. And so he wanted those props for a reason. Right. Which for some people is not a fun, and everybody wants to have fun. Don't get me wrong. I don't think of it as a pejorative answer to most people's experience of, this is why I play a role-playing game. Right. I want to enjoy it, but I also enjoy watching shows like Hannibal, which is about the cannibal, the serial killer, but I understand the perspectives. I can still sit at a table and be immersed in a character who I know may want to try and kill me, and I accept it. But that's a player's perspective, not so much a in-character as character perspective.
Right. So this brings us around to in order to be clear about how we're going to play requires communication. some experimentation, some exploration to see if it suits us, to see if it suits everybody, to see if
Yeah.
the way that we're accomplishing it is effective, how it might need to be adjusted, dial something up or dial something down, and you know, and then recognize that in order to have that fluidity of play, there will be a certain amount of improvisation, right? And developing the sensitivity of how that works in this group for this game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's very personalized. There's
Yeah.
no way you can give. It's why a lot of this stuff is always generalized, right? You
Yeah. Yeah.
know, and then you have to still do the work on your end. You have to tailor whatever DM's tips, tricks, and advice get told to you and fold that somehow into your group and find out whether it works or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's close out with an examination of that. So in Alex Thornton's first scene
Mm-hmm.
in the Game Master's superposition, I determined that this would start out in the boxing club.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I figured we were going to be spending an awful lot of time with Alex Thornton, Treasury agent. And so I thought that it would be less predictable, less likely that we'd wind up in the boxing club
Mm-hmm.
further on down the line. And so I wanted to see this aspect of Alex Thornton before I saw the Treasury agent. So I wanted to start there. But I didn't want it to be boxing because that would probably at some point involve some dice, or it
Yeah.
would seem really weird that there weren't any dice. So why would a bunch of guys in a boxing gym not be boxing? A bunch of guys in a boxing gym would not be boxing because someone is shooting their mouth off
Yeah.
or something like that. And so then I had in my head, right, the conversation that Steve Allwell would be presenting to anyone who would listen. And so this is the start to things, right? What is everybody in the city talking about? They're in some way talking about these stolen books, right? Why? Because it's the Depression. And if I could find those books, maybe, right, I could get enough money, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they're talking about. And but Steve has insight into the weirdness of these stolen books. They're not actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's not presented to Alex Thornton as a thing you have to follow. It's not a mission. It's not a command. It's um, not a financial imperative for him. He's not hurting,
No.
financially,
Yeah.
right? So it has no draw on him at all. It's just a detail in the world, what the common person is talking about. So you enter the scene and you're now free to play. So what was your process for doing so?
Well, I was actually very happy that you chose the boxing ring because I was kind of thinking, and I know we didn't discuss the opening part. Uh, I was very happy that you had chose the boxing gym because it seemed fitting. Uh, it's a space that would allow the character to kind of move in a way that's not related to Cthulhu. It's not related to his occupation. This for him is a place he hangs out. So it's a kind of for lack of a better way of putting it, it's kind of a safe space, right? Approaching it for me was what does he do when he's here? He has this history of boxing at Harvard. Yes, he is a boxer who is light on his feet. He is very skilled, but he's not a hard puncher. He's a middleweight, and he's kind of happy with being where he is. He knows he's not going to be a champion, because he knows he really, if it came down to it and he got pressed, if he was on the ropes, he probably would not be able to take a lot of punches, because once he couldn't stay away from something, he would be in trouble. Hearing the jeering and the introduction of Steve was definitely, from a player's perspective, okay, here's your mark, or that's how I kind of feel about it. Here's your way to help get things going. So this is your gift in improv that you're building the world with. Okay, I know I'm going to go over and interact with Steve. How do I know Steve? So as I'm approaching, that's why I want to set up that, what does he look like, or what do I see when I'm coming over and these guys are giving Steve a bunch of guff. So once the interaction starts, I know kind of what position Alex would have in his relationship with Allwell. Once we start having the interaction, and from some of your physical cues, whether or not you think you're doing it, and some of the vocal cues, which I'm pretty sure you were trying to emphasize, I can see that he's uncomfortable. So that's when I ask about the privacy thing, right?
Right.
And that's being attentive. So I wanted to approach the opening from, let's establish the direction we're going to go. Let's try and get a glimpse at what is potentially, and I'll go back to this phrase, what is one of Alexander Thornton's Chekhov's gun? We know now Alex is a boxer, but we have not done anything with boxing since that opening scene. So we know he can do it, but we're going to leave it on the table. It will more than likely come up later. We know it will, because it's one of his highest rated skills. So, but I need to be the investigator. I need to try and get Steve to be comfortable with me using my psychology, using my persuasion, to tell me what's really going on with him. He says he was attacked. This thing comes out. Who is it? Okay, now I have a bureau connection with what's happening. He was attacked by a gang member for, just
Right.
a general purpose. So now I'm going to use this as my hook. As a player, I'm thinking, okay, I can use this to help me move the action. In parallel, what I'm thinking as the character is, this is a guy I know on the street. Somebody's got to take him down. We've got to make sure that the family never does this to someone again. So I am almost always running in parallel. I'm running in parallel as character and running in parallel as player. Getting out of that scene, knowing that maybe he's been followed. If he has this kind of information and he's telling me that he's being copying books, is he the only one that knows he's doing this? Maybe somebody else does. I need to get out of here. Let's get out of the gym and go someplace else. So it's also my way to push back to you and say, okay, let's move the action to a different scene. Let's not keep it here in the gym and move to a different environment so we can see something different about both of these characters.
Right.
So from there, we move to the diner scene, right? So when we moved out of there, what was your idea of coming into the diner with Steve Allwell, the NPC? Because I know you like to play.
Yeah, at that point, this is my opportunity to play, right? It's no longer opening scene of the campaign, kind of artificial kind of thing. Now they're going to the diner because they decided to go to the diner. And I don't have any exterior agenda left. Right? He's not a way to start or introduce the conversation to the common man anymore.
Yeah.
Right now he's Steve Alwell, and all I'm doing is playing Steve Alwell. So he shows up, he has his copy of the books, he's shy, he's worried about his financial future, he's worried a little bit about his life. So he wants to have a friend. He wants to have a friend in Jesus. He wants to have a friend in the treasury, right? Because less than a month ago, your guys put Capone away.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this is the 30s, so people aren't saying Elliot Ness got Al Capone, right? They're saying that the Prohibition Bureau got Al Capone on tax evasion,
Yeah.
right? So you seem like the kind of treasury agent that could get Al Capone on tax evasion, right? So you are the golden calf. There's, it's an attractive proposition. So he's hoping desperately that he can at least befriend you or get into your circle and that kind of thing, be valuable to you, because he thinks like a sycophant, right? Right? He's water boy, towel boy,
Yeah. Yeah.
outlook, right? That's who he is as a character. And so I got these extra books and I can provide you with this stuff. Just take care of me, protect me from the villains that are out there. That's all I'm doing. But at the same time, he has to act like he's not terrified.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the diner scene for me was definitely a way to play into that. I am a character who is in a position of authority. You have potential information that is going to be useful, hopefully. How do I get it? How can I get you to trust me? Which is where the job offer comes in, right? It's a tit for tat exchange. I'll put in a good word for you if you will give me this. And I kind of, going back to the mechanical version, I'm looking at my character's sheet at that point in time and saying, okay, how far can I push that persuade? When am I going to get it to where I'm going to say something in character that will help me understand where Anthony will give me the signal? Okay, this is a rule.
I'm also looking at the sheet and making the same evaluation. Yeah.
Because that's for me to be able to move on throughout the rest of the scenes that are coming up. I need to kind of come to grasp with that, where I know and I'm comfortable.
You want to be aware of what will trigger a roll.
Well, I want to have an idea. I don't want to know specifically, because we're talking about persuasion. Okay, at the point when you're asking them for money, yes, that's going to be a roll. But maybe I'm not asking for a lot of money. Is that really going to be a roll? So this is the kind of gameplay I want to see as a player between myself and you as the GM. Is like, okay, this is how I learn how Anthony Boyd runs his game. This is how I learn Anthony's playstyle, by comparing me looking at the character sheet and him looking at the character sheet. Okay, I'm persuading. He's saying no call. Okay, I agree with that. I mean, I haven't pushed the envelope on trying to convince Steve of anything really that could harm him, that could potentially put him in harm's way indirectly, or that he
wanted to tell that story.
Yeah. He wanted to tell the story, and without even realizing it, he wanted to give someone those accounting books.
I was not to be able to punch back.
Yeah. Exactly. And I wasn't anticipating that. So when you first said he's got the books, I'm like, oh man, this investigation's coming to a close. I thought, oh, you've got the books? No, the accounting books. So, that's what I meant. I was like, oh man, are you kidding me? Those guys are over there in that group investigating this, and the whole time the accountant has had these books. So, I mean, there was a quick readjustment here, Brian. No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about the books.
Right, he pulls out this giant duffel bag with these giant books in.
I'm like, how did you make a cut? You translated Latin. Oh, okay, that's great. As much of accounting can be Latin, but so we get through the conversation in the diner and we establish, okay, here's this tit for tat relationship. You give me the information. You need to follow up at the office. Right. So at the same time, I'm trying to get the character moving and keep him believable. I am trying to establish these points of interest in the future. Like this is a potential
Sure.
thing that may happen, because that's how I want to, as a player, that's how I want to drive and give that gift back to you. Kind of like you're saying about, uh, having something available. Will that thing about the music be important? Maybe, maybe not. Will Steve Atwell showing up at the office be important? Maybe, maybe
Maybe,
not.
maybe not. Yeah.
But it could be a great situation if it does. There's all sorts of ways that whole conversation can go. So from there, if I remember correctly, we leave the diner. This is back at the house because
Right.
we went to the diner late.
Late.
Next day, it's up and going to work. So it's a shoe leather scene, right? I'm going to go into the office, check in,
But you
go by
didn't. You went in. You went into Dad's
well,
office.
yeah, went to the family's office first.
Yeah.
Try and check in there and get the ball rolling on that. As a player, I'm thinking this is potentially dangerous. I don't know if the books I'm handing over that are copies of the books may be something that the family may understand or is dealing with. Because I didn't want to ask the question, how does my dad feel about running two sets of columns? Right. I stayed away from that conversation on purpose.
Right.
Again, hopefully leaving room for a potential conflict of interest scene or something that could be valuable to add or not to the storyline by having the accounting books at the office.
Right.
Character wise, I want the scene at the front desk. How far can I show that even though I am the heir apparent, how far can I get into my own father's organization? I come to the accounting desk and this privacy area is the furthest I can go. So obviously there is something that is keeping me outside of the family's business.
Right.
Right. We still want to highlight that disagreement of the family. Plus, once it was I don't remember if she was a brunette, but once there is a quote unquote dame at the desk, now it's the opportunity to try and, is this going to be the dilettante lover boy scene? Is this going to be the I'm here as the treasury agent scene, taking advantage of the family business?
Right. How is he
Stressing that
perceived?
relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. How is he going to be perceived when he comes in the door? And that's because we had discussed before the game that this is part of one of the character conflicts we want to have as part of the backstory, is this conflict between family decision. And so for me, I think that was a great way to using the books as a way to say, okay, here's my prop. I take the books. I don't know if they're legal. I don't know if they're right. I don't know if my family knows anything about this or really how dad feels about shady accounting practices. Does he do it? But I'm going to hand this over anyway. So when you have someone at your table who pushes on these, do you try and just leave it at that? Do you just try and leave that kind of thing on the table? Or do you start to think about the possibilities, the forking, because eventually I'm going to have to come back to the office.
Eventually, I'm going to have to come back to the office. Well, that's
Eventually I'm
on
going
you.
to have to come back and check in on the books.
Yeah. So, in the old days, when I was trying to follow the advice in the World of Darkness games, you can be a storyteller. I thought I would try to, enhance my sense of things like timing and conflict and drama and et cetera, to bring about more artistic play or more emotionally affecting play.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never happy doing this. I was always happier when I communicated information that only the characters would experience. And when I made decisions based on what their actions, what NPC actions, what the dice communicated happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the secretary at the accounting firm could stonewall you because it's time for a die roll.
Yeah.
The secretary could stonewall you because it's time for drama, it's time for conflict, it's time for some kind of whatever. Dad could come out and see you there because it's time to, expose some character trait.
Mm-hmm.
All these decisions can be made on the story layer. I'm not operating there in this campaign, and I usually don't. So I'm not
Okay.
making any of those decisions for those reasons. So if you are doing things that your character sheet is telling me are normal, right? You have a good sense of how people are through psychology. You have a good ability to communicate clearly through persuade and through your language abilities and through your education. Right? You can make yourself understood. And then the role play is non-threatening. The role play is polite. It's indicating that Alex is showing up deferentially. I hope you have time, or I hope someone can take a look at this. I could do it myself, but I'm not certain that I could pull it off. Right? All of these things are loading the dice that this older woman, the secretary, who's watched Alex grow up and seen the estrangement between the two people, she's going to want to try and help him out. All seems to make sense in that normal purview. Now, if he's asking her to break the law, right?
Yeah.
Then die roll. If he's asking her to misappropriate company funds, it's a die roll. What she asked him is, can you have someone who's really good at this kind of accounting take a look at this and tell me what it is? It's not a big ask.
Yeah.
So it's fine.
So a lot of that whole part of our game, part of the session was all about framing it.
Yeah.
How setting up the situation, understanding what the pros and cons of trying to push something in one direction or another, what events it could trigger, right?
Yeah.
Which goes back to that idea of like character competency, character ability. When do I make they also don't roll too much, don't roll for everything, right?
Right.
Which I still am a huge fan of. I don't think it gets expressed enough. And what you're talking about there is just a great example of how do I come to that decision?
How do I come
given
to
these factors between the role play and the character sheet? And just does it really need to be a die roll?
Right. Now, some people are going to be more comfortable making that decision on dramatic logic.
Yeah.
We haven't rolled for a while, so we should. Or the character's trying to effect change in the world. They want someone to do something for them that they can do themselves. So we should have a roll. Or, it's been really easy so far, so we need to interject challenge.
Yeah.
There's all of these decisions is a perfectly valid framework. Right. And as the game master, the player might still be thoroughly ensconced in the in-character perspective, because you're not telling them, well, I think I'm going to ask for a roll because we haven't had one in 35 minutes. You must be bored. Right? That's not being externalized. That's just, well, I better ask for a roll because, I haven't asked for one. But that will completely prevent any possibility of me getting the opportunity to play this secretary in character as character. Will never be more than just part of the description if I'm also considering non-character reasons for doing things. So yeah, I could serve play by operating on the story layer while the players are operating on the character layer. Right. And I can have fun doing this. Like when I play 2D20 games, I'm going to be there, except it won't really be on the story layer that I'm operating. It's going to be on the system layer because I've got all this interesting stuff, all this meta currency I can spend. So it can take this activity that I don't like doing, right, operating on those layers, and turn it into a game and then I can enjoy the game part of it.
Yeah.
So, learning a new way, and the players get to, have fun in their own way on the other side of that experience. So that's kind of a thing. But here in BRP, right, I have the opportunity to play very close or play more often on the same layer as the players do.
Mm.
Not
Yeah.
exactly, because I
Still...
know more characters than they do.
Oh, true. I mean, and then after the accounting firm scene, we go to the office scene.
Work. Yes.
Work with Bill, which is, another great opportunity to kind of throw it into that ballpark of the first session to me, I was hoping we could really just catch a great, let's get a slice of life, slice of life, slice of life, slice of life. Let's just let the first session just be what it is, right, to establish what's everything that we'll see down the line. Right. So we've seen the boxing ring. We've seen relationship at the family firm, not necessarily with family yet. Now let's go to work to see that slice of life, right?
And that was an experience for me where my initial perception of the character that I portrayed in that moment was radically different from what I expected the second before I opened my mouth. So that was exciting.
And that's I hope, I don't know how easy it is or if it's easier between solo play and group play for a GM to really leverage that experience, right? Because there are so many perspectives that are getting tossed around. The last thing, and especially you don't want to have multiple NPCs in a scene where now I'm talking to myself and that just looks awkward.
Yes.
But the slice of life at the accounting firm and then work, they're kind of along the same lines. Let's establish these shots as they are. If you're talking about camera work, what does life look like for Alex Thornton, right? But now, how does Alex do his job? What kind of guy is Alex going to be? Is he a behind the desk, or is he an on the street shoe leather guy? Is he going to get out there and get his hands dirty? This dilettante's, wealthy. The only reason the Treasury agency probably took him on board is because they don't have to really worry about how much he gets paid, which is, and it was an interesting historical fact that I found out.
Yeah, a lot of them were,
they weren't paid crap. And a lot of them were not trained very well, right? So
and a lot of them were
the character kind of fell in. But then after that, how did you look at, and I know we're taking a lot of time here, how did you look at the scene in the shipyards, because there's a lot that kind of went into that one, right? I think the amount of time we spent doing that was probably the equivalent of maybe the boxing scene and the scene with the diner. It was almost half. The opening part was slice of life shots, and then here's Alex at work.
Right. So again, like to split it along story as product and story as byproduct lines.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I could have made the decision that, well, it's Call of Cthulhu, so something weird has to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at session 1 with Terrence McSweeney, reporter, right? It's Call of Cthulhu and something weird has to happen. It happens instantly. And then normalcy returns. He doesn't have to go into the office.
Yeah.
He could simply have gone and called the police or gone home or any one of 100 other things. Right. There's this moment of weirdness. Okay, now it's on you. Now in Alex's case, we have our brush with the moment of weirdness. These books have been stolen. But there's this weird detail that only you are getting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now what are you going to do? Yeah. So again, you could pass this off to major crimes in the police department because it's their business, not yours. It's got nothing to do with treasury or prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be an interesting feather in your cap if you're that kind of person, right? So if we look at it dramatically, right, these things can reach out and grab you. And when you think about what occurred to you at the docks, right, you went out and found weirdness. Weirdness did not come and find you, right?
Yeah.
We could have role played the rest of the session at the office with Alex and Bill trying to figure out what they were going to do about the O'Shaughnessy's, or what they were going to do about this new group who's taking over territory, or what they're going to do about these missing person cases, right?
Yeah.
Right. In the player agency realm, I have no attachment, I have no plan, and nothing is going to come and get you.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you got interested in, well, what is going on with this new group, right? I thought that showed us a lot about Alex's character. So, obviously somebody in this office has been spending a lot of time putting maps on the board and putting pins in the maps and stacking up piles of paper and collecting lots of data, but doing nothing.
Yeah. I'm getting ready to retire, is what he said, right?
That's right. And with luck, some of these stacks of paper will kill me before I have to actually. Right. So Alex goes out to investigate. That's fine. So that also could have ended with nothing, but you just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, right? To find something. Right. And so the dice did get involved, but what you were involved with was destiny. Right. So
it's definitely a fate situation. Yeah.
yes,
there's definitely that
luck.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, we could go this way or that way, or whether it was good luck or bad luck that brings you into the connection of
Mm-hmm.
of the gentleman downstairs. And now very aggressively, strangeness is playing with Alex.
Because here we're now we're transitioning from session 1 to session 2, right? Which I'm pretty sure you haven't posted yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Do you want to go into that, or do you want to leave that?
No, I think that's a good cutting off.
Okay.
Point here.
I would definitely say that, yeah, the trajectory of weirdness, it heightens, which feels appropriate, to be honest with you. I was worried that his premise for following this line of investigation may seem thin or flimsy, because there was also that part about we did have a very small scene, where he goes to the district office, the police office that's down there in that area, the police station that's down there. It's very minor, but it does help to kind of push him a little more, because the only connection, and I'm trying to keep it in mind of what does Alex really have to go on here? A friend of his got roughed up. He just so happens to be an accountant who works at a place that has been robbed. The subject of the theft are some books, which sounds really outrageous to me, but there's definitely something I can go on here. He's been coerced. Somebody may be trying to put the finger on him and coerce him into doing something, which, when he talks about who it's connected to, seems like enough of a premise for me to have interest in it. Then as we move forward, the diner scene helps strengthen it a little more. The scene at the accounting house, that's just an establishing scene, slice of life. The scene at the workplace helps to inform a little bit more because Bill's talking about how many files we have, what they've been involved in. You know, it wasn't just that I want to try and make sure that the reason for investigating seems realistic, but that for the character it is. He's
Right.
interested because a friend of his got in trouble.
Right.
It just so happens to be the actor in this case had mob involvement. How can I put the two together when we show up at work
What
now?
is our
We have,
tax evasion?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but
Yeah.
now we show up at work. Oh, you're talking about other disappearances. Oh, you're talking about the Morgan Company. Oh, we don't really know much on them. Well, what is it we do know? You know, oh, we don't have a lot. Okay, somebody, this being the call to action, somebody needs to now take action, right?
Yeah.
So I
But
was
none of us
hoping,
want to go down there as the
yeah,
unspoken thing.
the NPCs are never the ones that just say, you stay at the office and file the paperwork. We'll go down and handle it.
Right.
So I thought it was a great way to keep pushing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Because for me, I was like, okay, Anthony, give me something, give me something, give me something, give me some information about them. Okay. There's not a lot of, I've drained the office dry. I have to physically go there. You know, I realize that I could put the character in danger. This is Call of Cthulhu. I could probably get ganked while I'm down here skulking around. But if that's what happens, that's the story of Alexander Thornton. He's the guy who went out on a
Exactly.
limb for a friend,
Yeah.
and this is what happened to him. And
Yeah.
and just so you know, I mean, I think you probably get this from me anyway. I'm perfectly happy when a story ends that way.
Right.
That's the result of what happened. That is some stories just end, they just end badly,
Yeah.
you know, in bad situations. But the interesting part about it is, what is the situation when it ends? I
Yeah.
was unsure in that basement. Am I going to be drawing, you know, pig iron on this guy? Is there a reason to at this point? He seems shifty
just
enough.
just just kill this guy in the
Yeah. Does he
in
go
his
from being
basement.
the upstanding, you know,
Yeah.
and even as a player, and that's the hard part for someone like me, is the visualization happens so fast and it comes on so strong that it's like, I really got to pull back on the reins as the reel of my mind goes to keep it from turning into, how did Alex Thornton become a psychopath? You're in the
Right.
basement talking to a guy. He shows
I
you these
like
cards.
how
This
you
thing
leaned
happens, and your
forward so
first,
you could get access to the gun in the
yeah,
ankle
how,
holster.
yeah,
So your head's like just above the edge of the table.
just
It's like, tell
yeah.
me
I
some
got
more,
to
strange
itch.
man.
Yes, but how can is that even a rational action for Alex?
At this
Right.
point,
So
yeah, yeah.
at this point in this, and I think that's a lot of a challenging part for some people who do play in it, is they want to do something interesting. They have this thing in their mind that they want to do, but kind of like what Ivan was talking about. I was doing the thing. I was thinking about doing the thing. I just never said anything about it verbally out
Right.
loud, right? Would it or would it not have added anything? Would Alex have been, you know, turning into now, and then there's the whole rationalization of it. Well, what are you going to tell the boys at the office? You just shot 3 people in cold blood.
Tired of this whole legal system thing.
Yeah, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. Welcome to the Punisher.
Right. So
But
as you were pushing and pushing and pushing to try and see if there was like someone you could talk to, or
yeah,
if you could be disappeared, or whatever. Um, what was in my mind was that, well, maybe he's looking for someone who's willing to talk about this territory that they've just taken over. Like, maybe evidence is now available on the O'Shaughnessy's who used to hold court here, right? Maybe
yeah.
it's a friend of my
Enemy is a friend
yeah,
of my own. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But he it went in a different direction, right? So because of the dice, the stars were right for this meeting. Right. I don't decide that he's there waiting for Alex.
Yeah. And so that's where you're talking about, okay, here's where I actually made a luck roll.
Yeah.
And I unbeknownst, and I do like that. I like the idea of being comfortable with someone who can run a game and do it seamlessly like that. I'm gonna, just so you know, I'm gonna make a luck roll for you here to see if we can, get this thing moving along. Right. The ability to make that kind of call. I mean, for both of us, I trust you. You're trusting me not to get pissed off. You took away my player character agency. No, that's
but
not
I did
what
it.
this.
About the roll. Yes, I rolled.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The decision on whether or not a roll needed to be made, or for that matter, what kind of roll.
Yeah. Yes, but I loved the whole plan. The plan made me so happy. I'm going to go around this area and just be nice while being dirty.
Well,
I'm going to mess up my clothes. I'm going to dirty my face, and I'm going to ask people if they need help.
It kind of felt like something.
You
Alex
monster!
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we have 2 episodes worth of discussion here, but
you split it up however you want. I mean, it is a lot of material.
Yeah.
I like I said, I do definitely want to have session 3. I actually really excited to see where this now builds from how the scene ends in front of my house, because I think I don't know, I'm enjoying how it's going. Honestly, it is.
Well, I'm good. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And the weirdness that Alex has discovered in one day,
in less than 12 hours.
Yeah.
I picture, you being able to recap with the other group, the how did it always go at the beginning of the Super Friends? Meanwhile,
Yes.
back at the Citadel of Doom.
Yes. Exactly. Something like that. Okay. Well, take care.
Take care.